Hi everyone, I'm Cynthia Treen, and welcome to my channel. Today we'll be making the next addition to my storybook collection, this delightful donkey. I hope he'll burrow his way into your hearts as he has with mine. If you'd like to add some Valentine's flair, I've included a pattern for this paper heart chain in the PDF. Before you begin, collect your supplies. You'll find a full list in the pattern PDF, which is publicly available in my February 9th, 2025 Patreon post. Okay, let's get started. Begin by printing and cutting the paper pattern. To adhere it to the felt without pins or washi tape, print onto freezer paper. A hot iron makes its plastic side stick temporarily for accurate cutting. Rough cut the felt to separate the pieces. Then cut around the pattern shapes. A 1/16 of an inch seam allowance is included, so there's no need to add one. And take your time. Smooth, accurate cutting ensures well-fitting pieces. Freezer paper removal can often lift the fibers. If this happens, smooth them with your iron before assembly. Lay the inner leg pieces together and baste the belly seam. To whip stitch the seam without catching the basting, keep the stitch towards the adjacent edge at its narrow ends. Thread your needle with a single strand of floss and not one end. Then whip stitch the seam, securing either end with 2 to 3 stitches on top of each other. When filming, it seemed like a good idea to leave my basting threads long at their ends, rather than making a backward stitch or knotting off as usual. Turns out they got in my way a bit, so lesson learned. Here, I'm finishing up the seam with 3 securing stitches and an ending knot. And then removing my basting. Now let's shed some light on the darts. It's easy to confuse the mouth for another dart, but we'll want to leave the mouth open. The top head dart on the finished piece is here, and the lower chin dart here. And these are the upper and lower snout darts, with the open mouth just below. After stitching the 4 darts, the head should look like this. The head will eventually be turned right side out. Begin at the base of the V, then whip stitch to the edge with a few securing stitches at the beginning and end. Then, slip the needle through the surface of the felt and make the ending knot away from the edge. Place the side body pieces with right sides together. Baste under the chin, then the front snout and over the head, and again at the back of the rump, leaving a 2-inch hole for stuffing. Then whip stitch each section with a single strand of floss. As usual, begin and end the seam sections with knots and securing stitches. I'd like to point out a little something here at the top of the lip. There's a slight curve that will eventually be trimmed straight. Its purpose is to provide enough fabric to stitch the lower snout darts on either side. But trimming later on will shape the mouth properly. We'll come back to that in a bit. Now, carefully turn the head with needle-nosed pliers and roll out the seams. Flip the bottom lip with the pliers and push out the curve under the chin. Here, I've pinned the inner legs to the side body and the edges of the remaining body half out of my way. While basting, remove the pins as you go. Then remove remove the pins from the opposite legs and repeat pinning and basting on that side. Before we begin stitching the leg seams, I wanted to share a new trick. One of my Patreon members asked about how to strengthen narrow strips of felt, like bag handles or overall straps. In the past, I've used a running or buttonhole stitch on either side to keep narrow strips from stretching or breakage. But she got me to thinking about edge strengthening for other applications as well. I figured out that a pointed swab and clear gel tacky glue are just the thing. Apply a small amount to a swab and dab it along the felt edge, avoiding surface contact. On the surface, the dried glue can look like the slimy trail left by a slug. It doesn't take much, so be conservative and test out a sample or two before using the technique on your project. Here, I can feel the slight roughness of the dried glue, but I can't see it. On this untreated edge, my pin will pull right through, but on the piece with the glue applied, the edge is strong and stable. I suggest using the technique sparingly on narrow strip applications or at stress points where center seams and darts meet, and the stuffing will be firm. I'm sure you'll find a few applications on our donkey that this technique might come in handy. To stitch the leg seams, thread your needle with a single floss strand and not one end. Begin either at the neck or the tail with the starting knot hidden between the seam edges. To ensure a strong connection, start on the body pieces just above the inner leg juncture, then continue down one side of the legs. Avoid thread catching by pinning or folding body parts out of the way as you go. I've left this clip long to show how I shift hand positioning as I stitch a complex shape. Whip stitch along the seam around each leg to the juncture at the opposite end. For strength, I like to make 2 to 3 stitches at each inner leg corner. Then repeat on the other side. When you've finished whip stitching the legs, knot off, hide your knot, and remove the basting. To wire the legs, cut 2 8-inch pipe cleaner lengths and fold their ends over 2 inches towards the center. Then, tightly bind their center points, catching both ends in the thread wrapping. Fold the bound pieces in half and insert each end into one of the back legs, pushing them down until the pipe cleaner ends reach the felt of the toe. I found pliers helpful on the back legs. Repeat on the front legs. The angle here is easier to access with your fingers. I use natural wool stuffing to fill my felt projects. And for this guy, I'll also use a pinch of pale pink to shade his mouth. You'll need your favorite stuffing tool, like a bamboo skewer or stuffing fork, and a felting needle to add pink fiber to the open mouth. Start with small pinches of fiber and focus on the upper snout. I like to stuff the head and curved neck first, while the body is empty and flexible. If fiber fluffs out the mouth, just push it back a bit. Continue stuffing until the head feels firm and the forehead and chin have a nice curvature. Use the side of the felting needle to visually separate the top and bottom of the mouth. Then define that line with the needle's point, indenting the fiber to match the side creases of the mouth. You can fine-tune it later, but I decided to add a bit more to the bottom lip before moving on. I've experimented with shaping the mouth at various stages, so you can play with that too. This time I'll do a bit throughout the process. In teaching this live, I found that makers sometimes overstuff the heads, and the mouth was more of a challenge to rein in at the end. I'll add a bit more now to the neck before stuffing the legs. For the legs, use smaller pinches of stuffing, filling each on either side of the pipe cleaner. Once all 4 legs and upper haunches are stuffed, you can move on to filling the body cavity. Here, you can add larger stuffing pinches with your fingers. Then, with your stuffing tool, work some of the fiber into the upper haunches, compacting it there to create a smooth transition between the legs and torso. Continue filling the torso until it is nearly full. You can test by squeezing the opening closed. Then, lightly needle the stuffing surface to rein in any loose fibers. Thread a needle with a 2-strand length of floss and not one end. I like the baseball stitch for closing stuffed seams like this because it's strong and nearly invisible. The stitch is worked by alternating from side to side, much like traditional sneaker lacing. I'll close in multiple sections to show you how to work the stitch in 2 ways. Closing in sections also allows me to backfill below the stitch to refine the shape and fill in any gaps. In this version of the baseball stitch, I began with my knot under the left-hand edge, then switched to the right side, scooping the seam edge from outside to inside. Although I love this stitch, I'm dyslexic, so each time I use it, I inadvertently begin with my less desirable orientation. So watch the next section before you give it a go. You can see that I fumble a bit and could easily pick up stuffing with each stitch. As you progress forward, you can tighten with every stitch or every few stitches. Here, I'm doing a bit more light needling, then backfilling below the first stitch section. Another great stuffing technique is to create a scissor channel through which you can add more stuffing. You can learn more about this in my Stuffing Felt Animals tutorial. If you're new here, my basic techniques video is also a fantastic introduction to my process. Here, I'm speeding through a bit more baseball stitch to use up my thread, and knotting off and backfilling. It feels a bit soft here, so I'll make a channel for more stuffing to firm up the neck. This technique is excellent for firm stuffing. By expanding from the core, stress on seams is more evenly distributed. When I make the baseball stitch this time, I'm starting with my knot beneath the right side, scooping up through the felt edge, inside to outside. For me, this is easier, but I suggest you try both and see which you prefer. Now I'm making a few more stitches and backfilling before I close up completely. Knot off. And hide my knot. If you have any lumps, you can redistribute the stuffing a bit by squeezing in different directions. Unlike the whip stitch, the baseball stitch lays flat. It's not as invisible as the blind stitch, but it is much stronger. To disguise the seam completely, scratch over the surface to lift the fibers, then hit them with a mist of water or hairspray, and smooth with a hot iron. Now let's finish the mouth. Here I'm trimming the lip curve that I mentioned earlier. Next, I want to secure the felt skin to the stuffing fiber. Use a single strand of floss and knot one end. Hide the knot and make a tiny running stitch along the edge of the lower lip and draw in slightly. Then stitch from side to side, catching the lip edges and the stuffing below it. Then repeat on the upper lip. Before we needle the pink fiber into the mouth, I wanted to share an idea I had while filming. I've been experimenting with alcohol markers for felt shading and wondered if they would work well on the stuffing fiber too. And they do. These Cali Art pens are sold only in sets, but you can buy other brands individually. If I was using these pens, I would finish the lip edges as we just did, then color in the mouth fiber directly on the donkey. For those of you with needle felting supplies on hand, let's get back to my original process. Begin by tidying up any loose fibers. Then pull superfine wisps of pink fiber and needle it in to shade the mouth surface. It might take a few rounds of needling for full coverage, so less is best, or the layers can become too bulky. Also, needle shallowly here, so the pink fiber won't create whiskers on the felt surface. I don't recall if I did this on my first sample, but for this guy, I decided to pinch in the mouth corners. To do that, pass back and forth with a single strand of floss, drawing in slightly. Then knot off and hide your knot. And to hide your running stitch, scratch over and smooth with your iron. Use the base of this dart to help measure eye placement. Measure 1/4 inch forward of the dart and 1/4 inch down from its base. I pinned both locations for accuracy, then removed the top pin. Spiral the lower pin to create a visible hole. Then increase its size slightly with a skewer. You want the hole large enough to accept the eye shank, but not so large that the eye front pops through the surface. I'm using 4mm eyes here, so I've kept the holes quite small. Thread a long darning needle with 2 strands of floss and knot one end. For some reason, I've used an embroidery needle, which works, but it's rather short for the job. Enter the needle through one eye hole and exit through the opposite hole. Pass back through the holes again before adding the first eye. Add the second eye after another pass-through. Then repeat one more time, catching the eye shanks of both. Then knot off and hide your knot. Matching floss on dark colors can be tricky to stitch, so on charcoal and black, I often use white thread for visibility. We'll shade the thread in after stitching. Press the felt in half with a sharp crease and make a running stitch along the folded edge. Make the stitch line just deep enough to secure the folded edge. If you've used white, shade the thread with charcoal or black permanent pen after knotting off. Using the pattern markings as a size reference, cut the fringe of the mane into sections about 1/8 inch wide. Pin the mane to the center seam, starting 1/4 inch before the top head dart. To attach the fringe, I used a single strand of body matching floss, but you could also use charcoal if you prefer. To work the stitch, hide your starting knot in the side body. Exit at the base of the mane. Pass through the mane's edge, then scoop the body's surface. You might catch a leg here and there, as I did, but that's just part of the adventure. To soften the mane and create a well-loved vintage look, pull off the fringe ends one by one, pinching where you want the break. For fun and research, I tried pulling several at a time, then shortened a few more throughout. I recommend you go easy just in case on your first try, although I think you can pull off a bald spot or two. For the ears, you can make a simple tuck at the top or make them positionable by wiring the edges. For wiring, use a fine gauge between 24 and 30. I love the non-slippery surface of cotton-covered floral wire, and I shade it as necessary with marker or watercolor. Bare wire also works well, but it is slippery and can't be shaded to match. However, with a closely spaced buttonhole stitch, it can be nicely hidden. For better wire coverage, use a 2-strand length of floss and not one end. And for easier handling, washi tape holds the wire around the felt's edge. To work the buttonhole stitch, begin as you would a whip stitch, coming up through the back and wrapping around the wire edge. Before tightening the loop, pass the needle through it in the direction of your stitching. Passing through in this direction twists the loop and locks the stitch down to the edge with no need to maintain tension between stitches. Another way to work the stitch is a bit like American knitting, looping the thread around the needle to create the locking twist. When you reach the tucked edge, twist and bind the wires into a short post. Mine here measures about 3/8 of an inch. The post should be long enough to easily insert into the head through a skewer hole and create a bending joint. The ear placement is indicated on the pattern and measures 1/2 inch behind the dart and about 1/2 inch down from the center seam. Make a pinhole, then increase the hole size with a skewer. Insert the ear posts to be sure they're deep enough. Then glue them in with Zap Gel glue. If you don't have Zap Gel glue on hand, use Fast Grab tacky glue or stitch them in at the base of the ear. Well, we've nearly reached the end, and it's finally time to pin the tail on our donkey. In my original, I stitched the tail a bit loosely, like a coat button, then wrapped around the stitching to make a flexible post, allowing the tail to wag. And instead of a nail, I ornamented it with a 4mm antique bronze button. For this guy, let's assemble the tail, then decide what to attach it with. First, whip stitch the 2 pieces together. I've added wire to make it bendable, and folded the cut ends inside. The fringe is wrapped in a spiral and whip stitched to hold the tassel shape. Then stitch the 2 parts together. Don't worry about beautiful stitching here. We'll wrap this joint with ribbon. This is 2mm silk embroidery ribbon, but you can use yarn or another creative embellishment. I'm wrapping around a few times before I tie my bow. It's tricky to make a small bow with short ribbon, so leave it long if you can and trim to length after sizing the bow. A tacking stitch will hold the bow from slipping out. For the final attachment, I first thought I'd use a cherry red glass head pin, but then remembered I had some brads. And I think I like this copper one. So go ahead and make a hole just above the inner leg intersection and glue in the brad with some Zap gel, or another variety that adheres to metal. If any pills develop, spritz with hairspray, allow to dry, and then press smooth. If you enjoyed this project, I hope you'll join me to create more from the collection. The Storybook Bear and Piglet are available already, as well as the skep pincushion and honey jar. So stay tuned for more classic felt friends and tutorials to come. If you head over to the Collections tab in my Patreon, you'll find more public posts to enjoy and make. I'll look forward to seeing you there. And if you love making felt animals, while away some stitching time by the riverbank with my book, Wind in the Willows Felt Friends. Okay folks, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more felt and craft tutorials. If you liked this video, you know what to do and how to follow. If you'd like to visit my Etsy shop, become a Patreon supporter, or share a one-time tip on Buy Me a Coffee, you'll find links to all of those and my socials via my link tree. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy stitching.